Hi there folks, today I have got a deck walkthrough for you. I haven't done one of those for a while and I've actually been thinking that I didn't particularly want to do any unless I felt I could add value to the deck in question, and in this case I think I can, because this is a deck that is based on what is probably, if I was forced to choose, of all the TV series that I've ever run in all genre across the years, if I had to pick one that was my absolute favourite, the one that I would go back to in times of happiness and sadness and when I'm in need of a pick-me-up or just a chance to relax and kick back and have a laugh, then this would be the one. And this deck is based upon that show, which is of course the Golden Girls, and this is the Golden Girls Tarot. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn the camera around and do a point of view walkthrough, but before we do that I'll just make some general observations about the deck. So the first thing to say, if you can see, there's some headshots of the main characters, and the first thing to say is that the artwork in this deck I think is actually pretty good. It's recognisably the characters in question. You'll see that in more detail shortly. So I'm pretty pleased with the artwork. The card stock is okay. It's kind of slightly laminated, slightly glossy, not overly laminated, flexible, not too cardboardy, so fairly good card stock, not bad at all. Those are the backs, a kind of art deco design in keeping with the kind of aesthetic of the show. Doesn't come, strangely, with a little white book. It only comes with this card, which gives some general instructions on how to read tarot. So what I would say is that this is not a deck for absolute beginners. If you're completely new to tarot, this would not be a good starting deck unless you had with you a general tarot guidebook. Then you would be okay. And the deck itself is very clearly based on the Rider-Waite-Smith system. So if you know that system, if you understand that system, and you enjoy working with that system, then you will probably enjoy this deck. Now, I've seen some criticisms online already from people saying that it looks a bit gimmicky, a bit like it's a novelty deck, and clearly, of course, to some extent that's true because it's based on a comedy TV series, so it's clearly not meant to be taken entirely seriously. However, I would say that actually, as you'll see when I do the walkthrough, this deck is pretty true to the meanings of the cards in tarot as I understand them to be, and it's more than just a stuck together deck. I think some thought has gone into this deck, and it's clear that it's been put together by somebody who knows the show and appreciates the show, because you'll see that in some of the, particularly in the pip cards, and the minor cards rather, a number of well-known faces, guest stars and so on will pop up, and even the thinking about which card is associated with which Golden Girl, although we might debate some of those in terms of what our own interpretations would be, have actually been pretty well thought through. So overall, I'm going to say that this is a good deck, an enjoyable deck. I think I'll find it very readable and fun to work with, and you know, from my point of view, it brings together two of my great loves. The Golden Girls is a TV series, my absolute favourite, or one of my absolute favourite TV series, and of course the tarot. So in my case, what's not to love? So I hope you enjoy it too, and I hope that you'll enjoy this walkthrough. What I'm going to try to do is, as we go through the cards, I'm going to try and relate the cards that I recognise as being related to a particular episode of the TV series. I'll try and tell you a bit about that episode and how it informs the meaning of the card, etc, etc. So without further ado, let's go. Now Maya, I can't afford the rights to the theme tune, so you're going to have to help me, okay? Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Thank you for being a friend. Travel down the road and back again. Your heart is true. You're a pal and a confidant. Meow, meow, meow. Well done, Maya. That wasn't bad. Oh dear, that's the look of tolerance. Or is it long suffering? Okay, so let's get started on the Major Arcana and the first 4 cards of the Major Arcana, which of course are represented by the 4 Golden Girls. And This is the point at which I think it's worth just reflecting a little bit, for those of us who know something of the show, on how some of these associations have been formed and whether we agree with them. So starting off with the Fool, we have Rose Nyland, who of course in the show is portrayed as something of a fool. She's often the butt of the other Golden Girls jokes, often in a light-hearted way, although sometimes quite cuttingly and quite viciously. And the thing about Rose is she is very innocent, sometimes a bit dopey, even sometimes a bit stupid. But I think the representation here of the Fool is apt, not because of any of that, not because she is somebody who is not the brightest spark in the spark box, but simply because she is the innocent. She is the one who sees the best in everyone. She is the one who sees the new in everything. There's a childlike innocence about Rose, and I think that fits the characteristics of the Fool very well. Then we have Sophia the Magician. Now Sophia, of course, is Dorothy's mother. She's the oldest of them. She is easily the most mischievous and in some ways cutting of all of them. She certainly has seen quite a life, and we'll explore more of her life when we get to the minor cards. But it seems to me that she makes a good magician. She is often the one that all the other girls go to help them sort things out, because she is the oldest and in some ways is the wisest, and she's just such a marvellous character. So that's the Magician. Then we have the High Priestess, played by Blanche Devereaux here. Blanche, of course, being the Golden Girl that has, shall we say, a taste for the high life, a taste for men, something of a man-eater, and she's from the south. She's a southern belle, and so she suits this kind of High Priestess garb in that sense. And then we have Dorothy as the Empress. You might say the matriarch of the clan in some ways, certainly the most competent, if you like, the most educated, the most down-to-earth of the Golden Girls, often the one that pushes a pin into everyone else's bubble if they're becoming a bit overinflated. Now, you could, of course, swap these round. I think you could easily have Sophia as the Empress because of her matriarchal characteristics. You could have Blanche as the Magician because of her fiery, passionate nature. You can have Rose as the High Priestess because of her deep emotional nature, and you'll see that Rose and emotions feature very firmly in this deck a bit later on when we get to the minor cards. But overall, on balance, I think this is a pretty good representation. And I think this is a good point also to say that I think the artist has done a really good job of capturing the likenesses of Betty White, Estelle Getty, Rue McClanahan, and of course the wonderful B. Arthur. So I would say a pretty good solid start to the Golden Girls tarot deck. So let's move on to a few more cards, and I'll take them in groups because I think that works pretty well. So now we have the Emperor, and we have the Hierophant, and the Lovers, and one of my favourite cards in any deck, and particularly in this deck for reasons you'll see in a second, the Chariot. Now, again, how are we doing in terms of characterization? The Emperor in this deck is represented by Stanley Zbornak. You can tell it's Stan because he hasn't got his toupee on, and so he's bald-headed there. He, of course, is Dorothy's ex-husband, and really the impetus for the show is Dorothy going to live with her mother, who, well, she arrives later, but to live with Blanche, who's renting out rooms in her house because Dorothy has been left by Stan. Stan has disappeared off with an air stewardess, a younger air stewardess than Dorothy, and has left Dorothy, his wife of 38 years, and that's one of the ways that the show effectively gets going. So I think that, of course, indicates some of the negative qualities of the Emperor, but he is also the most consistent male figure in the show. So he does pop up, and you see that the relationship between him and Dorothy is rather more complex than just a hate relationship. There's obviously a lot of love still there in the relationship. Then Sophia is the Hierophant. I think that works quite well because, as I said earlier, Sophia is the one that they often go to for advice. She is very wise, worldly wise, and she suits that kind of advisory role really well. Here we see her again, portraying the angel, and here we have Dorothy and Stan. So we see that the theme of Dorothy and Stan's love affair, both positive and negative sides of that, is encapsulated in the Lover's card. And then we have the Chariot. The Chariot is so much fun. Here we have Blanche with a couple of hunky men instead of sphinxes. Blanche is definitely the kind of the go-getter. She sees a man and goes and gets him. So Blanche is, for many reasons, one of probably my favourite character in the Golden Girls. And this is my favourite card in many ways in the deck. It's my birth card, the Chariot. I have a picture of the Chariot up on the Rider-Waite-Smith Chariot up on my wall, in fact, in the room that I'm doing this walkthrough. So that works really well for me as a Chariot card. Okay, so we'll get onto some of the episode references when we come to the smaller cards, the minor cards. There's not so many episode references in the majors. They're a bit more thematic, as you can see. So the next four, I'm going to speed through these a bit more quickly now because I think you get the picture, or pictures. Sophia is representing, now is that? I don't know if that's focusing, that's better. Sophia is representing strength, and you could just imagine Sophia would be the one that would go and hug a lion in the show without any fear. Rose as the hermit, again I think that works quite well because Rose often is the one that's slightly isolated because of her innocence and the most deep feeling of the girls, if you like. So she makes a good hermit. Here's an interesting card. There is nothing, absolutely nothing about this card that pegs it as a Golden Girls tarot deck card. This could be a card in any deck. There's nothing in it particularly apart from this slightly Art Deco kind of look of the Wheel of Fortune. But that's fine. It works quite well just as a Wheel of Fortune deck. It's just, I don't know really why they wouldn't have put the Golden Girls in the wheel. Or made it a bit more specific to the show, but anyway. And then we have Rose again as Justice, and I think that works quite well because she certainly is somebody who has a strong sense of right and wrong in the show, and that often gets her into some interesting scrapes. So, moving on, the next four. Hangman, Death, Temperance, and the Devil. And I think again pretty good representations. I'm sorry I'm banging. I've got a slightly awkward arrangement for doing this. I can't find my usual tripod, so I'm using a bit of a makeshift thing, which is why I keep bumping into it. I apologise. Here we have Stan, the Hanged Man. He certainly is somebody who in the show learns to see things from a different perspective. The Stan we see at the very end of the show, when Dorothy marries and leaves the show, the Stan that we see after that is a very different Stan than we saw at the beginning. A much more, still basically the same Stan, but with a bit more self-awareness. And here we have the Hanged Man looking at things from a new perspective. And again, you can tell it's Stan because he has got a toupee which is hanging along with him. So it's the Hanged Man, the Hanged Stan, and the Hanged toupee. So that's quite fun. Death is Dorothy. Now, why is Death Dorothy? I think probably, again, because Dorothy is the most serious of the characters in the show, although she's very funny, but she's funny in a generally cutting way, and she sees often the darker side of things. So I think that's quite a fitting card for her. Then we have Rose, Merry Old Rose, again about balance, out on the lanai, which features so much in the show in Miami, pouring that impossible water. So you can see the Rider-Waite-Smith influence loud and clear right down to the insignia on Rose's blouse, which appears, of course, in the Temperance card in many decks. So Rose works well as Temperance, and Blanche works very well as the devil. She is the most devilish character. She is the temptress and the one who is tempted. So, and she's fun. She's just fun, and she would be great to spend time with. So I love Blanche, and I think that makes a very good set of cards. Okay, so the next set, as we move a bit further towards the end of the majors, and again I think pretty fun representations. The tower, of course, is Shady Pines. Shady Pines is the old people's home that Sophia is in at the, well, effectively we learn at the beginning of the show that's where she is. And she arrives, I think in the first episode, in fact, she arrives at Dorothy's new home with Blanche and Rose because Shady Pines has burnt down. And here we have Shady Pines, the tower, burning down. And throughout the show, of course, Sophia is threatened slightly by Dorothy of being returned to Shady Pines if she doesn't behave herself. So the idea of Shady Pines being this dark presence in the show is quite strong, so it makes a good tower card. The next few cards are maybe not quite so specific to the characters. We just have Blanche here on the lanai. It's her lanai, it's her house, and she's being the star, and, you know, sort of looking after her property in a way. Not really much more to say about that. Then we have Dorothy as the moon. This is an interesting one, actually, because what this made me think of is the fact that B. Arthur, who played Dorothy, also played a character in the film Mame with Lucille Ball. And in that film, she watches Lucille Ball on stage in a very elaborate kind of rig out. Or am I muddling this up? It might be actually B. Arthur that's on stage. I can't quite remember, but one of them is on stage in a production of a show where they have to sit in a moon, a crescent moon like this. What I do know is that B. Arthur, in her one-woman Broadway show, which I actually saw when it came to London, I saw her live in concert in London. She was amazing several years ago, and she sang a song from Mame called "The Man in the Moon is a Lady," and this card made me think of that. Incidentally, when B. Arthur did that show, she had a stinking cold, but she went on anyway, and she went on barefoot, and she gave a fantastic performance. So, got to love B. Arthur. Then for the sun, it's Rose. Again, not much to say about this. Rose is Little Miss Sunshine in the show. She is the brightest, sunniest, most positive character, and the sun is a very appropriate card for her. Okay, so just two more majors to go, and then we're into the minor cards. So, Judgement is Sophia judging Rose and Blanche. Again, I don't quite know why Dorothy doesn't feature in this card. Certainly Sophia is the one who might be most judging of the others. Certainly she tends to see through their nonsense, so this is kind of appropriate. And maybe it's just that she couldn't judge her own daughter. But Dorothy does show up in the final card, and that's the world. And in a sense, this is appropriate because the culmination of the show is really the culmination of Dorothy's story. So when she meets the man of her heart and leaves the girls and goes to marry him, or marries him and then leaves the girls, it signals the end of the show. The Golden Girls as a show comes to an end. So it's appropriate that the end of the major arcana journey is in fact Dorothy with the world in her hands. So those are the majors. So we're going to go through the minors now, and what you're going to find, I'll just show you this very briefly, is that each of the minors is represented, not surprisingly, by a different Golden Girl. So each Golden Girl gets their own set of minors. Now again, we might quibble about which should be which. So who would be the fieriest? Who would be the earthiest? Who would be the most intuitive and emotional? And who would be the sharpest? Well, the way that this deck proclaims it, it's very clear. They see Sophia as the fieriest. They see Blanche as the earthiest. You might easily swap those round actually, but that's how it's seen here. They see Rose as the most intuitive and emotional, and I think that pretty much works. And that of course leaves none other than Dorothy as the sharpest and most cutting. So I think there's a logic to that. Let's go through them one by one, and here is the point at which I'm actually going to start referring to specific episodes, because these cards, many of them do specifically refer to specific episodes. And let's just that's better. Let's just zoom in a little bit so you can see them more clearly. I'll do these one by one because it makes more sense to do so. Okay. I hope that's all right for you to see. So again, not much to say about the Ace of Wands. It is what it is. Not specifically Golden Girls, apart from the fact that you can see references to Miami with the beach and the palm trees and the kind of style of architecture. Here we have Sophia at the Two of Wands. Now, what does this make me think of? There's Sophia looking out with the world in her hands, contemplatively. This makes me think about the fact that Sophia Petrillo in the show is of course an Italian immigrant. She comes from Sicily, which is why she keeps saying picture it, Sicily, 1922 or whatever it is, before she tells an anecdote. And she moved to America, and much of her anecdotes centre around her early life in Sicily or her early life after she had moved to America. So such an apt such an apt card in relation to her character. And we see more of that in this card. This is the Three of Wands. She's looking out into the future, and I think you might just be able to make out that what she seems to have reflected in her binoculars is in fact Miami.
Sicily, 1912. A beautiful young peasant girl with clear olive skin meets an exciting but penniless Spanish artist. There's an instant attraction. They laugh, they sing, they slam down a few Boilermakers. Shortly afterwards, he's arrested for showing her how he can hold his palette without using his hands. But I digress. He paints her portrait, and they make passionate love. She spends much of the next day in the shower with a loofah sponge, scrubbing his fingerprints off her body. She sees the portrait and is insulted. It looks nothing like her, and she storms out of his life forever. That peasant girl was me. And that painter was Pablo Picasso.
Now, there is the first card that refers to a specific episode, and this refers to the episode number 6 in series 4, which is called Sophia's Wedding. And this chap here is Max Weinstock, played by the actor Jack Gilford. And Max Weinstock is actually the widow of one of Sophia's oldest friends, Esther Weinstock, who has died. And Sophia goes to the funeral and she encounters Max, and they have an argument because Sophia blames Max for the collapse of Sophia's deceased husband's business. And it turns out to all be a misunderstanding, etc., etc. And in fact, Sophia and Max end up almost getting married, but they don't. But that's how he features in this Four of Wands. There's something joyful and celebratory about that. One of my favourite lines from the show, or dialogue from the show, is where Dorothy, Sophia and Rose are sitting around the kitchen table, and Sophia has just heard that her friend Esther has died, and she's obviously very upset. She's crying, and Dorothy comes in and says, "Ma, what's the matter?" And Sophia says, "Esther Weinstock is dead. We grew up together. She was my best friend." And Dorothy says, "I'm so sorry. What happened?" And Sophia, in her typical cutting way, says, "She was fighting an oil rig fire in the Gulf of Mexico. She was 88. So, I enjoy that episode very much.
Who's in charge here?
Well, what's the problem?
I'm the caterer. It's 2 o'clock. The guests are waiting. Why isn't the show on the road? Ma, I know you're in there.
The wedding is off.
She doesn't approve. She doesn't approve? Now look here, Stretch. 100 cheese puffs and a sensitive assistant, both on the verge of collapse. Whatever the problem is, overlook it. My mother did with my marriage. And if you say something smart, I'll slap you silly.
Listen, this is a private moment, so butt out, Rambo.
This is more moving than Susan Hayward's climactic speech, and I want to live.
You're ready to fly right out of here, aren't you?
Well, excuse me for living, Anita Bryant.
The Five of Wands. Here we have the girls at a bowling alley, staring each other down. And in this episode, it's called The Competition, which comes from Series 1 and it's episode 7. What actually happens is they go into a bowling tournament as partners, but then I can't remember all the details of it, who betrays whom, but I think it turns out that Rose ditches Blanche because she knows that Blanche isn't such a good player and takes up with Sophia, who was originally barred from doing something by Dorothy, and to get back at Dorothy hitches up with Rose, so they end up being a team against Blanche and Rose, and hilarity ensues. My favourite line from that show is nothing to do with the bowling. It's when Sophia is stirring her famous 14-hour spaghetti sauce and says, if this sauce was a person, I would get naked and make love to it. And there's also a part in the show where Blanche says something very funny. If I can find the clip of that, it's Blanche expressing her dismay at something. I will find that clip and I'll put it in, because it's kind of what goes through my head very often these days as I watch the news.
Well, I am stunned. Just stunned. Stunned is the only way to describe how stunned I am.
Just a minute, Blanche. Are you trying to tell us that you are stunned?
So, that's the Five of Wands. Moving on to the Six of Wands, and this is a scene from the episode Flu Attack, sometimes called just The Flu, which is also from season 1, and it's episode 21, and basically in that episode all of the girls apart from Sophia get a really bad dose of flu, and but they also, the side story is always, there's always a main story and a minor story in the show. The minor story is that they're going to this award ceremony to see who wins the Best Friend of the Year award, and they're all fighting with each other about who's going to get it and being really unpleasant to each other, and then they all learn a lesson, because guess who actually wins the award? It's dear old Sophia, who wasn't originally even in the running. That's a bit of a spoiler, but to be honest, I think even if you know that, it doesn't take away from the enjoyment of the show. So
Do we have any orange juice left?
No, we're all out.
there'll be more spoilers as I go on, so I'm just warning you now. Seven of Wands. This is from the episode The Actor, which is in season 2, and this is episode 14. And the reason Sophia is dressed in this outfit is that she, in this episode, gets a part-time job at Captain Jack's Seafood Shanty. And my favourite line from this show is where she's heading out the door wearing this pirate outfit, and Rose, the great innocent, says, "Is that a Captain Jack's Seafood Shanty uniform, Sophia?" And Sophia replies with, "No, Rose, I'm off to discover the Straits of Magellan. Yo-ho-ho." And off she goes. So, moving on, we have the Eight of Wands again. This could be from any deck. It doesn't have to be the Golden Girls, does it? Just a fairly straightforward Eight of Wands. There we have Sophia, the Nine of Wands. Again, not from a particular episode that I can think of, just a general representation. And she pops up again, of course, because the Wands is her suit, as the Ten of Wands and as the Page of Wands. And then for the Knight of Wands, I'm not entirely sure if I'm correct here. I think this is a character from the episode Rose's Big Adventure, and I think, because the other thing that happens in that episode, Rose goes off and I think travels back to St. Olaf or something, I can't remember exactly why, but the other side of the side story in the episode is the other girls are at home remodelling the garage and they make a complete hash of it, and Sophia brings in her old Italian chum Vincenzo, who's played by Vito Scotti, and this is he on that. I might be wrong though, I might be muddling him up with another character. It doesn't really matter, does it? Then we have the Queen of Wands, of course, that's Sophia. And then the culmination of the deck of wands, or the suit of wands, King of Wands, is back to Max Weinstock, played by Jack Gilford. I think a bit of an opportunity was missed here to not use Salvador, who of course is Sophia's husband, and we do see him in the show in flashback more than once. So I think it would have been nice to have had Salvador, Sophia's actual husband, who she clearly loved very much, although she was exasperated by him as the King of Wands. That would have, I think, been even more appropriate.
You know, I cannot remember when I had a sponge cake quite so moist.
Extremely moist.
The moistest. I found the tea rather moist as well. What, I can't be uncomfortable too?
Onward, onward. So that was the wands. Let's move on now to the pentacles, and again a fairly standard pentacle. Now this is Blanche's suit. Blanche, as I said, is my favourite Golden Girl. It's very, very close, but I think overall Blanche is my favourite. This is her suit, so it's kind of disappointing that there aren't many references to specific episodes in this. They're just general, generic Blanche pictures, being the Two of Pentacles, there with the other girls being the Three of Pentacles, probably making a cheesecake. There she is, dreaming of holiday and money, perhaps. She's definitely the most money-minded of the girls, so maybe the Pentacles make sense both from that point of view and from her earthiness. Very striking card there, the Five of Pentacles. Not a kind of characteristic you usually see of Blanche. She usually looks much more cheerful than that. Six of Pentacles. Again, we're not seeing any particular episode references, so it's a bit generic. Seven of Pentacles, Eight of Pentacles, Nine of Pentacles, and again, no Golden Girl reference at all there, really. 10 of Pentacles, just a tree with pentacles. So I feel that they've not quite gone as far with the Blanche suit as they could have done, but the next few cards do at least have some specific references. So this one, this character, the Knight of Pentacles, is actually Big Daddy, who is Blanche's southern patriarch of a father, Big Daddy Hollingsworth, and he appears first in season 1, episode 24, an episode called, appropriately enough, Big Daddy, where he turns up telling Blanche that he's sold the family home and wants to become a country and western singer, and she of course is horrified. He is played by the actor Murray Hamilton. Then we have Blanche as the Queen of Pentacles. She would certainly enjoy being the Queen. And then we have King of Pentacles, and this is actually Blanche's deceased husband George. How do I know that? Because he turns up in the episode called Mrs. George Devereux in season 6, it's episode 9 of season 6, played by George Grizzard, and he turns up and says that effectively he faked his death, blah 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 blah. Anyway, there's a twist in the tale which means that things are not quite as they seem. I won't spoiler it too much, but nonetheless it means that we do have an actor who plays George, and so they're able to use him in this deck, which again is why it seems so strange that they didn't use Salvador in the Sophia suit. Anyway, that's Blanche and the suit of Pentacles. So the next one is Cups, and this is Rose's suit. I'm just going to turn the light down a bit, it just looks a bit glary. And here we have Two of Cups. Now, who is this character? Fans of the show will probably say, well, that's obvious, it's Miles. Other people might say, no, it's not, it's Archie, or Arnie rather. So the reason for that is that this character, played by Harold Gould, or rather this actor who's being represented here, Harold Gould, played two characters in the show, both of them boyfriends of Rose's, and unaccountably different characters. So in episode 24 of the first season, which is called Rose the Prude, he appears as Arnie. And then he's only in for one episode, then he disappears and isn't in for quite a long time, and then comes back in the fifth season in an episode called Dancing in the Dark as the character Miles, and he stays in the show on and off throughout that period all the way through into season 7. So that's Arnie or Miles, depending on which one you prefer. Three of Cups, there's the three girls and their cheesecake. Four of Cups, not a particular episode I don't think, although that pose reminded me of a moment in the episode Job Hunting, which is this 22nd episode of season 1, where Rose is looking very sad and despondent because she has lost her job and isn't, of course, very happy about that. She's also not very happy here in the Five of Cups. Again, I don't think from a particular episode. Six of Cups, we have Arnie, aka Miles again. Then the Seven of Cups. Then the 8. Then the 9. The 10 of Cups is interesting, not because it comes from any episode, but because it's very clear, it's clear to me anyway, knowing that that must be Rose, that must be Charlie, her deceased husband, who she refers to often in the show and clearly has a deep love for. And it's really quite touching. There is one episode, I think it's called The Birthday or Birthday Cake, where we learn that every year on Charlie's birthday she sets out a cake for him, a place at the table and a cake, and she has a conversation with him even though he's not there, and it's very, very moving. More than one episode of The Golden Girls over the years has made me blub like a baby, so it makes me laugh and it makes me cry, and that's one of the reasons I love it so much. That will be Kirsten, her or their daughter, who does feature in the show as an adult. So that's a lovely card. Rose is back as the Page of Cups. The Knight of Cups is portraying a character from one of my favourite episodes of The Golden Girls. It's called A Little Romance. It's episode number 13 of the first season. The actor is Brent Collins, and he plays a character called Dr. Jonathan Newman, who is a little person, a dwarf, and Rose is dating him, and he turns up. He's invited actually by the other girls because Rose is being very secretive. He's invited by them for dinner, and when he arrives, of course, Blanche thinks it's all a big joke and hopelessly embarrasses herself in one of the most awkward but brilliant moments of television ever, brilliantly played by all of the cast, particularly Rue McClanahan as Blanche. It's just fantastic. It's probably, if I wanted to introduce somebody to the Golden Girls and all of their humour and all of their characters, I might pick this episode. It's just absolutely fantastic.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jonathan Newman.
Are you absolutely sure?
Yes, may I come in?
Oh, please, 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 come right in. May I take your height?
Thank you. You must be Dorothy. Rose has told me all about you.
I wish I could say the same. Oh, Blanche, this is Dr. Jonathan Newman.
Get out of here. But Dorothy, he's
A little early, yes, but we're delighted to see him.
Hi, Jonathan.
Hello, Rose. You're looking lovely this evening.
Oh, wait a minute. Rose Nyland, you devil, you. I just figured out what's going on here.
Blanche.
You were sore at me for inviting your friend without asking you, so you hired this guy to come over and teach me a lesson. God, I wish I was dead.
Queen of Cups. This is Rose again. A bit of a missed opportunity here as well, I think, because one of the things that we are told by Rose more than once in the show, that she was Minnesota's Dairy Queen, and she makes a big thing about that, because she comes from St. Olaf, and dairy is very big in Minnesota, I believe. So they could have done something to make this look like she was the queen of the dairy. I suppose the colours, the pastel colours, do put you in mind of old-fashioned ice cream parlours, but a bit more could have been done there. And then again, we have King of Cups, it's Miles, and alright, there wasn't a character, nobody ever played Charlie, so we never saw what he looked like, but it would have been nice in a sense if Charlie had been the King of Cups. But he is not. That's okay. It's still a pretty good representation. Okay, and on to the swords. We're moving on now to Dorothy's suit. Again, a generic ace. Then we have Dorothy as the 2 of swords. Here we have Dorothy as the 3 of swords. And I think probably this is a pretty apt representation because, as I said earlier, it's Dorothy's heartbreak at being left by Stan and her anger at being left by Stan that drives much of the show's narrative initially. So it makes sense that she would be the one that's standing in the rain, heartbroken but resolute. Then we have the 4 of swords, resting on the lanai. The 5 of swords, I think, says something about Dorothy and Rose's relationship, because Rose is often cut down by Dorothy. When Rose says stupid things, they all kind of lay into her in different ways. But Dorothy tends to do it more than most and more cuttingly than most. But Rose doesn't come out of it on her own. Dorothy does that to anyone that she perceives as being foolish. So at least she's when she's nasty in an equal opportunities way. This card also makes me think actually of the off-screen relationship between B. Arthur and Betty White, because it was long rumoured that they feuded while they were on the set of The Golden Girls, and then towards the end of B. Arthur's life and after she died, and when Betty White opened up about it a bit more, it became apparent that it wasn't necessarily a feud, but they didn't always see eye to eye. I think the story is that B. Arthur, although Betty White liked B. Arthur and admired her as an actress, B. Arthur found Betty White somewhat irritating because she cut her teeth on television and was much more likely to play to the audience in between takes than B. Arthur, who cut her teeth on the stage and was a bit more reserved. So just very different people. And I remember thinking at the time I learned this, it's always disappointing when you learn that characters you love so much on TV weren't necessarily friends in real life, the actors, but that's just of course how it goes. But Betty White always speaks very highly of B. Arthur. Then we have B. Arthur rolling either, is she rowing towards Stan or rowing away from Stan? I think probably away. That's the that would be the plan. Although the way that's positioned makes it look to me as though she's rowing towards Stan, which kind of doesn't make much sense, but maybe it just signifies the conflict that she's experiencing around Stan. 7 of Swords, and again, not related to a particular episode. 8 of Swords, probably not related to a particular episode apart from the one where they end up in jail, and that's the episode called Ladies of the Evening in Series 2, Episode 2, where the guest star is actually Mr. Burt Reynolds, and they all get very excited about that. And the reason that Dorothy, Blanche and Rose end up in prison is they're mistaken for hookers, which Sophia, who has to come and bail them out, thinks is absolutely hysterical. So that's the 9 of Swords now, Dorothy. Then 10 of Swords again, that mixed feeling about Stan, and it's clear she does have mixed feelings about Stan. She almost remarries him at one point in the show before thinking better of it, and had more than one re-encounter with him. And as the show goes on, it's clear that they do, despite their differences, still have a deep bond of love between them. Page of Swords. The Knight of Swords, I think, is depicting, I don't know, that's not focusing, is it? Hang on. There we are. The Knight of Swords, I think, is depicting Dick Van Dyke. Yeah, I think it's meant to be Dick Van Dyke. And he, in the show, now we're going completely out of focus. Come on, come on. There we are. Back to normal. So Dick Van Dyke plays a character called Ken, who Dorothy is dating. He's a priest, actually. No, I'm wrong. I'm muddling him up with somebody else. Dick Van Dyke plays a character called Ken, who is a lawyer that Dorothy is dating in the episode Love Under the Big Top, which is in episode 5 of season 5. And in this episode, her Dorothy's boyfriend, who's a lawyer, decides he wants to quit law and become a circus clown, and that causes, of course, consternation and hilarity. We have the Queen of Swords. It's Dorothy, the queen of the cutting remark. Could not be, I think, more appropriate. And finally, the King of Swords, Leslie Nielsen, who plays Blanche's uncle Lucas, who comes to visit Miami and meets Dorothy, and they fall head over heels in love, and she marries him and she leaves the show. And in the final episode, you see her leave the show, and you know, the reason that they wrote it that way is because B. Arthur wanted to leave the show, and she did leave the show. The other three stayed on to make one season of a spin-off called The Golden Palace, which was not terrible, but was not as good as The Golden Girls. It was definitely missing something, where they go off and set up a hotel called The Golden Palace. But this was the episode One Flew Out of the Cuckoo's Nest in The Golden Girls. Season 7, episode 23, the last ever episode of The Golden Girls, where Dorothy marries Lucas and leaves. And if you are a fan of the show, and you followed the show as I did, and you watched that final episode, then all I have to say to you, if you did not shed a tear, in fact, if you did not shed more than one tear, then you must have a heart of stone, because I definitely had to fight back the tears when I watched the episode. And I periodically, every so often, every few years, I watch all of the Golden Girls again, every episode from the beginning to the end, and it never, ever fails to move me. That final episode where the girls say goodbye to Dorothy.
I'll be out in just a minute.
Okay.
Well, yeah. I guess this is it.
Right. Listen.
Dorothy, you don't have to say anything. I mean, what can you say about 7 years of fights and laughter, secrets, cheesecake?
Yeah. Just that it's been very, well, it's been an experience that I'll always keep very close to my heart. And that these are memories that I'll wrap myself in when the world gets cold and I forget that there are people who are warm and loving and...
We love you too.
I'll miss you.
You will always be a part of us.
Your friendship was something I never expected at this point in my life. And I could never have asked for a better surprise.
That's how we feel too.
I have to go.
Dorothy, is this goodbye?
I love you. Always. Oh, God, I love you.
So that is the walkthrough of the Golden Girls Tarot, and I think overall I would have to say that that is a fun deck. If you're a fan of the Golden Girls, if you're a fan of tarot, particularly if you're a fan of the Rider-Waite-Smith system, there's a lot going for it in this deck. Just be aware that it's not a good starter deck unless you also have a good guidebook, and it could have been improved with some more references specifically to the show and with a little white book, but overall I think that's a pretty good effort, so it gets my thumbs up. The Golden Girls always gets my thumbs up. And if you do a party, inviting everyone you know, you would see the biggest gift would be from me, and the God that would say thank you for being a friend. Wasn't that bad, Maya.